There we go.
Okay, let's see if I can turn this. All right. Everybody hear me in here, more or less? Okay. Thanks, Kyle. Thank you everybody for joining. My name is Bankim Tejani. As Kyle mentioned, I've been around LastCon and the OWASP community for quite a while. Been volunteering for LastCon since 2009, which is our, I think, the first year, second year. Josh?
2010 was first year.
2010 since that first year. So I wanted to go through this talk for you. It's a new one, and as many years now, I think since 2016, I've been the MC and host for LastCon, and I have no problem being up on stage. But this is probably the most kind of like weird talk that I've done, and it's because of the subject matter, right? We're not used to talking about it, especially in larger settings, and so it was one of the challenges of doing the talk was to come with this. So I'll start with like what inspired me to come up with this topic and propose it. It actually started well, a little before then, but one of the things that kind of like put me over the edge to do a talk about this was a talk at LastCon that I was at, which was about empowering women in cybersecurity. And one of the things that was a key theme in that conversation that we ended up having in the room was around the pay gaps, pay inequities, and then also just the challenges that people have about that. And through that conversation, I heard about from Boyd, who's one of our other previous speakers and another friend that I've made through LastCon over the years. He mentioned a topic that they've had at DevOps Days, which is a pay talk, where you get into a room and you have kind of a safe space. It's a little harder to do in this format with presenting, so we didn't go full out to that, but I'm hoping we can build up towards that for this community as well. Throughout the years, I've mentored other people, people that I've worked with, friends on their careers, on salary negotiation, and then for myself as well. And I'll share a few of those stories that I can later in the talk. And then my wife has been an inspiration for this because she's a better negotiator than I am, and she's helped me over the years at different times to kind of navigate these conversations and help build my skills in that realm. And then the lessons learned that I wanted to share. And I've been in AppSec now for coming up on 20 years next year, plus, years before that in InfoSec and then software development. And so I want to share some of the things I've learned on the way, and good and bad, and feel this is a good way to give back to the community. The talk is probably aimed a bit at, earlier and mid-career, but I also hope that there's some things in here that even those of you who are senior in your career can still learn and apply. And a challenge also for those who are hiring to think about things a little bit differently as well. So my goals for today are to share and kind of bring to that. Hopefully give you some questions that you can ask yourself around your career or going into another negotiation or your next step that you want to do. And then unlock a little bit of having an uncomfortable conversation about pay, because it's something that a lot of us just don't do. So I'll start with a little bit of just some title history. I don't want to go through like where, whatnot, but one of the things as I was thinking about this talk was like, okay, where have I been? What are the roles? And this is something that factors in a lot often in both salary negotiation, but also career developments is like, what titles have you had, right? And something that's on your resume and you look at. And as I was putting this together, what I kind of figured out is like, oh, it's interesting. As I look back, early in my career, I was very, I think, focused on trying to build towards being a CISO. And now that I've had the CISO title in a couple different roles, and looking back at this as I was reflecting about this for the talk, the title that actually like I was maybe most proud of or most had the most affinity to, and it felt like correlated the most to what I want to be and the value I want to bring, was actually just member of technical staff, right? And that was the one that was there. It's probably the least fudged of the titles because there's lots of title inflation that happens all over the place these days. So something I put there. I want to, can't read it quite, but the little arrows are where actually at the same company, right? So one of the things I noticed in doing this is that this has changed quite a bit over the years for me as well. Really, in the last now not quite 10 years, but a little bit 7 or 8 years, all the title changes have come with job changes, right? And it's also, I think, indicative of industry. You don't see as many people spending 5, 10, 15 years at the same company. And so and we see this in data as well. Often the best way to get yourself compensated to market is not to stay where you are, is to go somewhere else, because somewhere else will pay you market. Your current place will only pay you an incremental amount more than where you're at today. And I think that's unfortunate. And not all companies do that. There are some companies that will do market raises in between, but it's something that I think is very negative towards career development, because it does promote you to go elsewhere, but that also takes away that longevity that you can have and the value that you can bring of being in a place for a long period of time and to create that value. And I'll share some of the stories of how that actually helped me in my career. So that led to, okay, what are some of the ladders that we see around us? And I think the most common career ladders that we see are, the tech software engineer career ladders, right? And so these are the ones I pulled off of some great resources now. 10 years ago, you had to piece this together yourself. And now there's so much fantastic data about career ladders and career development. So I'm not going to go through all of it. This is all from levels.fyi, but there's a bunch of other ones. Dropbox, I think, was one of the early companies that published their entire ladders for all their career paths. And I think I commend companies that do that, and the sites like levels.fyi that encourage people to come and share. And I think this represents really an iteration on things that have been around for many years. If you go talk to anybody who was at IBM for many years, or some of the national laboratories, they have similar ladders, right? They have bands, call them different things at different companies. And it does, for software engineers in particular, it shows a progression, right? And there's a progression of the work that you do, the level of autonomy you're supposed to have, the level of control you have around your work, the level of collaboration, and so on and so forth. One thing that's interesting about that is the difference between AppSec engineering ladders and software engineering ladders. And there's some things that are really, really uniquely well tied, right? And in many roles that I've been in, we've tried to build our AppSec ladders in alignment to, or very similar for, or drafted from the software engineering ladders. And a lot of companies do this as well. Right? The technical skills are often very similar, right? You have software engineering background typically, or something of that nature, very technical. And then you have the addition of security knowledge on top of the engineering knowledge. There's a good alignment on goals because you're really both focused on helping deliver software at velocity, especially with DevSecOps today. And you work together quite a bit, right? So these are often very aligned. SRE is another ladder that aligns very well. But one of the things that is very different is the additional skills and knowledge are hard to value, especially for HR teams, right? If you align to that engineering ladder, there's only so much lift that an HR leader is going to let you have for one ladder and the other. So you're going to be, maybe 5, 10, 15% difference. And so when you have the extra skills of security on top of the software development skills, that takes time and effort. It takes mastery that you've built over the years. And yet it's difficult to separate from those levels. Another facet of that is the ratio. And the ratio makes a big difference, right? When you have thousands of engineers in your company, you can have ladders, you have less stratification, you can have 8 levels. Most companies have a ratio anywhere, a really strong AppSec team is probably a 25-to-1 ratio, 25 developers to 1 AppSec engineer, right? That's very strong. A lot of companies are in the hundreds, if not more, right? And so it's difficult with that kind of sample size, right? If you've got 500 or 1,000 engineers, a ladder's going to be meaningful. And you can use words on that job description to differentiate what somebody did or didn't do. That's a lot harder when you got 5 AppSec engineers, or 3, or 1. what does that mean to have a ladder for it, right? At that point, you're just fudging a title and a salary band to kind of keep that person. And so while the ladder can be useful, it's not necessarily the end all be all of your career growth. Right? If you're a solo AppSec engineer at a company, like, does it matter if you're an AppSec engineer, senior AppSec engineer, lead AppSec engineer? Like, that's just a word because you're still the one dude doing all the work, right? Or if it's a small team, you have that, and so that makes it challenging both to value and then for you to negotiate what you're doing and then what that title means for you. And so you can also have a lot of title inflation. The flip side of that is you can turn that on its head, right? You can decide as part of your negotiation, hey, I'm one person, I'm doing this, I'm taking this lead role, and I want the title that matches that. One of the things I noticed when I was going through this development and kind of building out the content, I compared. And one of the things I noticed is typically you get to, for the software engineering ladders, you get to like a level, if there's 7 or 8 bands, you get to level 3 or 4 before it says you own something. And almost everyone I looked at, the AppSec engineer, even the first level AppSec engineer, which is typically like an SE2 or software engineer 2, says you own AppSec, right, for your application, right? And then if you get to senior levels of AppSec, it's you own AppSec for multiple applications. And so that's a big differential as well is the expectation of autonomy and the judgment you have to have. And that's something that when flipping around, those are key differentials that you should take in how you negotiate your position, right? How you negotiate what you're doing, because that autonomy is something that's valuable. That's not something that's seen. And I don't know how many of you have seen this, but how many times have you seen like, a senior or an AppSec engineer going to debate with a principal software engineer about the importance of an issue, right? Or a lead software engineer, right? That's
Do you mind if I interject
lead.
something here?
Yeah.
So I think a lot of people know that I spent a long time running security here at National Instruments, and this was something I struggled with quite a bit. My title here was Information Security Program Owner.
Yeah.
And the reason for that was because everybody at NI basically said, well, you're not a manager yet. You don't have, we're not going to give you a CISO title because we can't make you an officer. And it went no VPs, nothing like that. And so I took on the owner title, kind of like you said, to show that I'm owning this thing.
Yeah.
The perception from inside was the same. It really didn't change anything because I was still doing what I was supposed to be doing. From outside, though, titles matter. And people look at you with your title and they're like, well, he's just, owner or whatever. He's not a CISO, so we don't want to talk to him. Eventually, vendors start to learn you're the guy they want to talk to,
Yeah.
but it takes time to build that.
Yes.
And it also looks weird when you're trying to show your resume to somebody else. You're like, well, why weren't you the CISO? Well, because they wouldn't give me that title.
Yep.
Why didn't they give you that title?
Yep.
It leads to some weird conversations.
It does. And of all different levels too, right? And that happens at the engineer level. And even I bet as program owner, you probably got like, oh, you're project manager, right? They're like, the thought that not on the technical side, even though you were. I've had that as well at one role I was a senior manager of product security, but I was the person. And often they would have director level meetings and talking about security related outcomes, but I couldn't be in the room because I wasn't a director, right? And it was even the engineering directors who I was got along with tremendously well. They're like, yeah, you should really be in this room. And then so they're the entire session they're back channeling me, and I'm giving them talking points and feedback to give because that's the way to give value is to collaborate with your partners and do that. But it's a challenge, right? It does make an impact on what that does. Please.
That sounds pretty dysfunctional. Somebody in the organization needed to look at that and say, this is not the way we should do business.
I would agree that it's pretty dysfunctional, and I would agree that it's probably still pretty dysfunctional in most places, unless you've got really large amounts of resources and large security teams. At very small companies, it's difficult, right? And especially at companies, I do some VC advising, and we're like, there's no security team at all. There's no full-time person. It's just one consultant part-time helping out. And when you have smaller teams, that's the same. So I would say that's indicative of, maybe a broader dysfunction between security and the way we build software.
Well,
Um,
Bankim, doesn't it also kind of it equates to where the security reports to in general too? If they're truly standalone or if they're in the CIO, it's still with the operations and CIO side, it makes sense for them to not have you as a director. Even though you're working with those engineering guys directly at the same time, not having you there means that they can still say security
yeah,
is secondary type.
yeah,
So it bubbles up a little bit to that of where does security actually report into and what's their level of authority.
yeah. And
And that's a good question. Where should it?
Yeah.
I mean,
Which is always the hard thing with it's independent, it's
yeah,
organizational dependent.
yeah. And all this, and sometimes it's also people dependent, right? So one of the roles I was at Under Armour when we had MyFitnessPal and we had the data breach. And myself and the privacy leader were both senior managers, and we had the data breach. We went through it, front page CNN, BBC, like the worst thing you could think of. But at the end of it, we came out of it with a world record, effectively, of quality of response. We went public in 4 days, which I think still really hasn't been beaten in terms of how fast we did a response. And we were called out by the European data regulators for the quality of our response. And after it all, the next year, looking at things, the privacy leader who reported up through legal and risk, their leadership recognized, hey, the program you built led to a great, response and outcome. Yes, we had a bad thing happen, but the way we responded to it was amazing. Here's your director title. The IT leadership that I reported through was like, you had a data breach, fuck you, right? And not going to promote you, right? So I mean, and that was the effectiveness, right? It was like, hey, we're not going to promote you. You had a data breach. All of it, all the root causes, everything was well before I ever started, well before she ever started there, right? It's all legacy, but it's just that perception, right? And different leaders, different personalities, and that's one of the things you have to deal with. And then you decide what you want to do and how you move forward.
So Scott online, company culture often pulls AppSec doing a group or HR and a centralized security to a role within DevOps teams, the later which is more of a maturity curve. Also seen where heavy SaaS-based build versus buy the application security can be at endpoint around patching. And then he's saying when I think of engineering, I think is shipping code, which it's company specific, really.
Yeah.
Some people say engineering, some stuff is AppSec, but often AppSec teams that never ship code, just ideas or reporting, which is quite true too. Some AppSec teams are more policy compliance AppSec than they're checking and replying and making sure it's set up. So
yeah, and you see this
And you,
like some companies, GRC is very technical. Like the hot thing right now is compliance as code, right? That's a big thing in some of the more advanced tech companies. So there's a big spectrum there of all of that. I think Scott was trying to say something.
yeah,
I was going to say you could actually take this slide and throw in AppSec versus engineering versus architecture, because
Yep.
I've seen it different companies, smaller, bigger, where even architecture has kind of that I'm doing this task, and it's more based on a role or a job title as to what it is. But there's a lot of overlap between AppSec engineering and security architecture. And I think you have to really look at the like breadth of knowledge versus the depth of knowledge and see where that tees in, and then also look at where you're trying to be like an AppSec if you're centralized security, more aligned with the compliance of things, engineering more with the shipping of things, architecture more of the future state and reuse of things. And then you've kind of got three different tracks you can go on depending on if you're better at technical relationships or even compliance type things, and then it kind of makes sense. But you do cross those lanes in practice when you're doing each of those roles within the company based on culture and people. And
Absolutely.
The processes within the companies are going to lead you to where you've got to build your own or you've got to tee into somebody else's, and that's getting acceptance.
Yeah. And the other facet that I think matters in all that is size of company, right? So larger companies,
Yeah.
you have more of that diversity, more of that spread. Smaller companies, you're going to have a lot less of it and doing more, with one or fewer number of people doing all those roles. The other thing I noticed when I was preparing for this was the lack of transparency about specifically application security data, right? So this is actually from levels.fyi, same place I got the latter image from. And they had not enough data to share public data about AppSec engineer salaries. AppSec engineers roles have been around forever, right? And so there's a reluctance, I think, in the community. I wanted to call this out as a call to action of like, hey, consider going and sharing and using these resources. But the other hand, they had this security software engineer, right? Which is, and the band it also kind of indicated this is more of like a developer that's doing security related software development. Right. And so it was interesting to kind of look at the data and see the things. I wish some of the AppSec engineer comp ranges were in this range. I definitely know that there are many that are not in this range and that are on the lower end of that. So I think there's a much broader spectrum that we can unlock, and we can't do that unless we're willing to share and be open.
I find that very unusual, given certain states have put laws in where they have to transparently.
Yeah.
I'm saying I find that very unusual, given certain states now have to publicly publish salary
That's right.
ranges with job posts.
Yeah.
That well, I think Colorado too, that they have to put this, yet this
Yeah.
data is not surfacing or aggregating somewhere. There's something more
It's not.
weird here.
Well, and I still see postings without that data, right? So even though, yeah, some companies that are posting in California, Colorado, a couple other states do have to have that transparent salary range. A lot of other states don't require it, and so I definitely see posts where they have that. Yeah.
I just had to post that one. I'm not
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
The range.
Well, but the problem with those laws is that they only require the base salary. So like you basically see that like, like you're getting paid, like 150K at Amazon and people actually get paid like $500,000, right?
Well,
So I think it's actually the opposite effect for people who are not aware of that.
Visa actually, we have both Colorado, California Visa where I work. They actually have the range that salary will be. They actually say the bottom and the top end, which is
Yeah.
really
I think
interesting.
But does it
he's
include the RSU?
equity
Like,
and bonus,
Yeah,
RSU?
well, don't, that's just your
Yeah.
salary. That's purely
Yeah.
his salary, which actually
Yeah.
still somebody have a lot of high good salary prices, but at the
But
same point,
it is a
doesn't
good
it's
point,
not
right?
full compensation.
Man is so large, so like, where do you know?
Yes.
Could be like 100,000, 200,000.
well,
I mean,
but I think it only works if a salary is like the prevailing kind of like compensation. But if the prevailing compensation is RSU, then effectively that's completely left out.
correct. And that I think that is a very important point, right? Part of the total compensation is no longer just base salary. It's the RSU, the equity portion, bonuses, performance bonuses. And so that all factors into it. You can even see with this range, right? I mean, that's a huge range of a band, right? And so that's difficult to know, okay, where do you fit? How do you fit? How do you negotiate that band? Those are difficult questions. The other element that bands and structures do for developers is they have this really great progression path, right? Of starting engineer, moving up, lead. You can go to program management, you can go to engineering management, you could stay lead, you can go to principal. Well, if your AppSec team is 10 people, which is a very sizable AppSec team for a lot of companies, right? Is this even relevant? Right? Is this meaningful? Right? Is there enough room?
That was Josh's problem. If you had too small of a team, yeah.
It's very tough. If you only have two or three, that's even more difficult, right? To do that. And how do you create a progression? How do you create that lateral movement? It's really hard. And so I think one, as leaders in AppSec, those of you who are leaders and managers, is to really consider that in how you frame title, and then also how you intentionally develop and promote within your team. And often what I found is I have to be the one pushing back on HR to make that happen. Say, hey, look, yeah, this person isn't going to manage people, but the work they're doing is equivalent to an engineering manager. I want them to be in that range, and I want them to have that, right? And I've often come across where you have a director of AppSec, and in many companies, a director manages managers. But in AppSec teams, almost always a director manages individual contributors, because you don't have enough managers in AppSec to manage that for a team that's that small.
Do you think that I liked how you said the framing and some of the vagueness going on? Do you think the framing is the problem, that we're basically trying to put people into categories that may have been applicable, 20 years ago when we were engineering the way we built things at IBM in these large production strains? I mean, most of the companies I've worked for in the last decade, one had value in something like this. The rest of them
Yeah.
were impact in the role and the
Yep.
job satisfaction. But yet there was a high obsession, even in those smaller startups, to create ladders and create structures like this
Yeah.
that were completely artificial.
Yes. And I 100% agree. And I don't mean it in a negative way. I do think the apparatus and the process of human resources lends itself to this, right? Even if you are a smaller company, the first kind of HR person you bring in, they're going to ask you, where are your ladders? What are your career development? What's your individual development plans, right? That's part of their Bible of fundamentals. The same way that when a security person joins a company, is like, where's your malware controls? Where's your EDR? Where's your this or that, right? It's part of their Bible of operating. And I think that lends itself towards this. And so one of the things that I've tried to do in my last few roles is to really get to know my HR person and then start to advocate through them and really educate them about these dynamics, right? To the extent that that's helpful. It doesn't always work, but it's something that's very important to be able to do that. And then they can be your advocate. You're going to have limits. Even their hands are tied to some degree of like what tools they have available. But if you can build a good relationship with them, then you can maximize the tools that you can use through them to take care of your team. How are we doing on time, Kyle? I don't know.
About 10, 15 minutes.
Okay, I'm going to skip the video because there's not a lot of time. But look this up. Adam Ruins Everything has a great episode about pay and pay transparency. It's 5 minutes long. It's wonderful. There's a link to this if we send the slides out. You get it. But you can just Google Adam Ruins Everything pay. Watch it. It's worth 5 minutes. But it really is all about pay transparency and what that does. I'll share a couple stories with you. When I first started my career, I graduated at the most wonderful time at the end of 99 when the dot-com bubble was about to burst. And so from the January 99, everybody who was graduating with my degree had 2 or 3 offers. November 99, because I graduated in December, November 99, nobody had any offers because everybody was waiting until mid 2000 to decide if they were going to have jobs or not. And so I luckily had an offer from the company I interned with. And even though there weren't other people in the pipeline, I was like, hey, I interned with you. Here's my value. I think we can do this. And they initially had offered me 50, and I was like, and said, hey, this is what I delivered for you as an intern. I think this had this value. And so that we settled on 58. Right. And it was a great kind of move, like had no leverage, really had nothing else in the bag, and was able to say, based on what I did for you as an intern, and that was a company that wasn't typically hiring someone as technical as me from RPI. I was like, hey, this is a good value, and that got me the role. A few years later, and one of the ways that you can also kind of jump in promotion, when I was at the national laboratories, I was able to participate in their education programs, which included a scholarship for a master's degree. And so then after you graduate, in the next promotion cycle, it's kind of automatic, you get bumped. And because you got a master's degree and now you're that. And so that was really valuable to be able to do that and participate. If your employer has those kinds of programs, often it does come with, if you participate in the education programs, you get an advantage, right? It's not always guaranteed, but it's something to have to consider now that you've gone through their program, that you've elevated your skills, that they have to take care of that. And then they're incentivized to keep you. This is an example where it worked the other way. So I was moving to New York, and so as part of relocating, I asked for 135, and we went back and forth, and they're like, 120 is the most we can give you. And I was like, should I take this job or not? And I was moving to go be a girl. We're married now, it's all good. And my wife was like, I mean, just take it. Like you'll figure it out. And I was miffed. Like I was miffed about it. I was like, I know I'm worth this much. I found out, a year later that one of the guys who was trying to hire me, the team told them, give me what I want, give me what he asked for. But they had a new, VP, and he said, no, this is going to be the amount. I was like, okay, fine. And so I took it anyway. I didn't like be pissed about it the whole year. I went in, I delivered. In 7 months, I was the most billable consultant on that team. And in January, right, which is atypical, I also give the VP credit. He's like, hey, we were hard with you. We did hardball with you for 120, but you earned this. And they gave me what I asked for right away, and still got another raise, 6 months later on top of that. Right. And so part of that was how I was showing up. I wasn't miffed about it every day or like, shirking it. I was delivering value. And then that led to, okay, hey, this guy's this billable, like we should take care of him that way. Right. And so those are things that, like, even if a negotiation doesn't go your way, it's a worthy lesson to do your job. Right. And also the other facet, the part of what helped me was my wife was like, look, whatever you take it at, you got to be happy. And that's a philosophy I've kind of taken through my other parts of my career. Is like, whatever I accept the job at that first salary when you're going in, I need to be happy at that salary for 5 years. Right? And if I come in with that mindset, then anything else that happens, I get a merit raise, don't get a raise, get a bonus, don't get a bonus, that's all icing. But if you go in with the expectation that, oh, I need to get a little bit more, right? You're going to make yourself miserable. And then that's going to show up in your work. And so I think that's something that's really valuable as a lesson to take through.
Do you mind if I add
Please.
something? So as somebody who hires people and decides how much I'm going to pay people, I take a similar approach where I ask them, how much do you need to make to be happy? Right. And then it puts the ball squarely in their court.
Yeah.
This is how much I feel like I'm worth. This is how much I need to make to be able to pay my bills and do the things.
Yeah.
And then that puts us on the right footing because I can go, okay, I either can pay that or I can't pay that. And then it's a binary decision for me.
Yeah.
Is this person worth making that?
Yeah. And that transparency goes well both ways when you can verbalize that and communicate it. And that's part of like being comfortable talking about it, is to be able to have that conversation and not feel like you're reaching or you're asking for something that you don't deserve. Because you have to be happy, right? That's the part that's important. The last one I'll share, and this is another vector that we don't often think about. I know you brought up RSUs and whatnot in equity. I was at a startup. We got acquired by a big company, and at the startup, I had a base and a bonus. But the company that bought us didn't really do bonuses for that our level of engineering ladders. And so between myself and my leaders, they kind of made the case of, well, the last 2 years he got this bonus, like all of it, right? So like that should be considered just part of his base salary. And so just on that alone, I got a 30K pay bump in base pay. Now that was my new base pay. And so I was able to take that to my next employer, but like, that's my base pay, and build on that. Right. And that's something that I never would have thought of. Right. And it opened my eyes to like the structures that you can play around that. And as I've learned over the years after, there's so many other things you can do with RSUs, with bonuses, with signing bonuses, annual bonuses. So there's lots of opportunity for that. And you got to open up that box and be able to like work through it and talk about it and understand how those systems work.
And that's definitely one of the things, like you said, negotiating. It's all the other additional things you can do for RSUs, PTO, more vacation days, things like that. If they do vacation days, that's even starting out.
That a lot of people don't think about is sometimes you can negotiate vacation days, especially at smaller companies.
So you mentioned that like you basically get the bonus added to the base pay, and you took it to the next employer. So does it actually matter? Because I think like in some states, they're specifically prohibited from like asking for a previous salary. And even in those that kind of like they don't prohibit that,
well,
it doesn't really come up that often, does it?
I didn't give them a pay stub. I said this is where I'm making now, right? And there's some amount to that, but you're correct. And that was also 10, 11 years ago. So that like that was it was a different point. I think today, especially in the last 5-10 years, there's a lot of laws around not asking that in order to reduce the pay biases and inequities. There's a lot of laws around not the employers and HR policies saying you can't ask for their base pay. You have to kind of focus on what's the role worth and the market value of the role. But there's a trade-off to that because now it's going to start to swing the other way a little bit with the way the market's going right now, is that roles may pay less and you got paid more before. And so that there's a slippery slope now that might swing the other way.
So I think like most of the time negotiating leverage depends on how strong you are, right? If you're applying for a job, how strong a candidate you are. There's that. But also I've noticed, right, a lot of times candidate or they'll bring who have multiple competing offers, they get a better leverage to even negotiate salary or other deals.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on that?
Yes and no. I mean, leverage matters, right? And in all of these different aspects of negotiating.
Like switching jobs a lot, they
Uh,
confidence goes away.
I think these days, because of the way the market is, companies lay people off on a whim. I think people are much more forgiving. I think more of the managers I've talked to lately are more forgiving. There are some companies that are less forgiving about that, and it varies.
It really depends on the organization, though.
In the organization, some companies really want to see that longevity. I think the other facet of it is sometimes even that leverage doesn't matter. I'll tell you a story for that. Years ago, I was hiring a senior AppSec engineer or security architect, and we had 5 candidates, right? 4 of them were men, 1 was a woman. And our range was, like we had a budget of like 160 to 180 was our like budget that we had for it. And the candidates that came in, all of the 4 male candidates all wanted something in the 190 to 210 range. That was their like ask. And this woman, her ask was like 175 to 180, right? She was the strongest candidate, hands down, right? Had the leverage, in my opinion, from a skill standpoint. She interviewed the best. It was a clear, this was the best candidate, right? It wasn't even close. At that time, that company had taken away negotiating from managers, and only the HR rep could negotiate with the candidates. And the HR rep went in low, so we're going to offer 160, right? Even though, right, we had all the data, right? And I even said straight out, I was like, look, the male candidates are at this level. She's at this level. She's already behind. Was the best candidate this far. And I said straight out, just give her 180. Right? They went in, said 160. And the HR person was a woman too. Said 160. The candidate, countered. I think she countered like 172 or something. And then the HR was like, split the difference again. Right. And for me, I was like, man, I feel shitty. Right. She should have had the leverage, like you're saying. But they still weren't willing to go that route, despite the fact that there's already somebody that was undercompensated for the market, for the skills they had. And was a woman in tech, in AppSec. And it really kind of broke my heart. I, couldn't like betray the other stuff, but I did tell the candidate, like, I think, as the manager, like, you have to make the decision whether this is worth it for you or not, and what your value is. I can tell you that, the range you're looking for, the range you're asking for is not unreasonable for what people are asking for in the market. And ultimately she decided not to accept the offer. And then I mentored her, and like 3 months later, she got like 220. Right. And she deserved it. She was awesome. But it's hard because even when you have leverage, sometimes you get screwed by the systems and the processes that are there. The other thing with negotiating and we know about salary, we're talking about bonuses, performance bonuses, signing bonuses. There are actually other stuff that you can negotiate that most people don't know about. One of the best ones is exit and severance packages. So if you get laid off, I've been laid off, right? It's actually a document you can negotiate, right? They're going to put the pressure to you to say, hey, sign this. This is as is, but you can negotiate that, right? And you do have leverage. You don't have extreme leverage, but you have some leverage to be able to negotiate that. One of the facets of that in those kinds of things, sometimes you can negotiate extra health insurance or COBRA coverage. But another area for cybersecurity that we should really all be considering is director's insurance or D&O insurance for cybersecurity. If you're a decision maker, you're making risk decisions, right? That's something that's really important to have. Legal fees, right? If you have and participate or your company's impacted by that and you have to get your own lawyer because you get deposed, right? You can negotiate that they will cover your legal fees, right? For whatever lawyer you choose. One of the ones I learned about and have leveraged is in most severance packages, and also sometimes that just standard termination paperwork or exit paperwork, companies will have clauses that say, hey, if something happens, or something that happened on your watch, that you can come back. We'll ask you to come back and either meet with our regulators or attorneys, or to cooperate about information or systems information that you may have. And that's great. Like I think I try never to burn bridges when I leave a company, but that's also something you can say I need to be compensated for, and so you can put in a rate for that time that you spend with them, right? And actually lock that in or put a variable rate to it, right? And have that, and that way, if they ever call you back, you say, hey, this is it, and you can invoice for that. It's built into your exit agreement. And then with that, you can also negotiate back a consulting agreement, right? To say, okay, if you need help, especially for a smaller company that like, okay, we are downsizing, but they're still going to have security problems. So, if you have a good relationship, you can negotiate back a consulting agreement where you can, do that and create an extra stream for yourself.
And of course, these are all negotiating things these talk about are like the end of it. And people go into jobs thinking it's all happy puppies and bunny dogs and all that jazz. So you don't want to think of insurance. You don't want to think of legal bills, recall, consulting afterwards. So do keep that on your list of stuff to think about. Hey, as I'm going into a job, ask for these things. It doesn't hurt to have those in there, and it might actually help you down the road when something does occur that, I mean, the severance packages that has nothing to do with you. It's just the organization decides to downsize something. Well, now you have a severance package. You know what you're going to get versus, oh, they've negotiated this, or you into this severance line that you're not getting anything on this layoff time.
Yeah. And I've heard about other, VPs and not just engineer, not just security, but other leaders, typically a sales leader that comes in the last year or two of a company as they're trying to go either go public or to get acquired, they're going to ask for equity acceleration. So instead of all their RSUs vesting over 4 years, they're going to say, hey, if I help you get this company to sale and to get acquired, all my shares will accelerate and be valued. And so these are very common clauses. You hear about exec CEOs getting, their golden handcuffs. Well, that's what they negotiated on the way in. And so unless you think about that and are plan and are able to have those conversations when you have leverage, you don't always have leverage, but when you do, that's worthwhile. Go ahead.
So like for consulting, I think you're supposed to basically negotiate like the hourly rate that is higher than your previous rate. So does it actually work in practice? Like if, for example, if your hourly rate like on the base salary was like, say like $80 an hour, right? Can you do like $160 or $200 an hour for the consulting?
Negotiate. You could ask for help to negotiate, but yeah, you can do something like that.
But like, is it actually likely to be accepted? Like that's basically the question.
I 100% had it accepted.
Okay. So like you were working like 40 hours a week and then you
do
consulting for like twice the rate at 20, like that's going to be accepted.
I was getting laid off, right? So I had a full-time salary and structure. And then I was like, okay, if you need me to come back and do security consulting, that's effectively vCISO work. And here's the market rate for vCISOs.
How much higher was it than the hourly rate for the employee? For you as an employee? Like was it 2x, 3x, 4x?
Double, so a little bit, almost 2x.
Oh, so less than 2x?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, just almost 2x.
So they agreed to that?
Yeah,
basically.
they didn't even blink.
Did they actually hire you? Did they actually end up well, that's my point. Did they actually hire you, like, or did they just kind of like, did they retain or whatever?
It didn't end up needing it, but it was still there. They accepted the terms.
Right.
There were other terms they didn't accept, and we were going back and forth. But that was like they didn't even blink about that. I was like, man, I should charge more.
Oh, what did they not accept if that's not a secret?
Extended terms. I think some like bonus. Like I wanted some prorated bonuses and some other stuff, but or further out.
Okay.
But yeah.
The hardest one, I think, is health insurance.
Yeah, health insurance is a big one. Yeah, yeah.
For companies.
Oh, like Cobra? You mean Cobra?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I'll skip the Marshawn Lynch quote. It's fun for me because it's if you're into football at all, it just talks very abstractly, but it's basically about taking care of your money, taking care of your family, your health, your mentals. I'm gonna breeze through these a little bit. So one thing in my career that was incredibly powerful, just in freedom, is your personal finance situation. And I never thought it would mean anything, right? Like, years ago, I think it was 2009 or so, we paid off my house, right? The first house we had. And my wife and I had a strategy of like, we live within our means and we live within the idea that if one of us didn't work, we should be able to maintain our style of living. And so we just, whatever the lowest salary was, we try to live within that salary. And that led to like, we saved a lot and we were able to do it. And I never expected that to relate to work. But in fact, it created work freedom because it took away that little thing in your mind. If I say this, I might get fired, or I might piss off somebody, right? Not in a mean way, but this is the truth. This is what I believe is true about our current situation or about our current project or what's going on. And it unlocked that freedom because if you can't handle that truth, in a nice way, it's not like I'm, getting angry at someone or blowing it down their throat, but saying, hey, this is really what I believe. This is what I think what's going on with our project and what we should do. And they gave me that freedom to say that without being reserved. And that itself opened up other possibilities and other opportunities because it comes across as confidence. It comes across as deeply held belief, which it was, but it wasn't reserved because of the idea like I might get fired or somebody might not like it if I say this. And that financial freedom is huge for that. Another facet of that is mental health, right? We're in a stressful industry. Invest in your mental health, right? But also, part of investing in your mental health will build the emotional and self-awareness for you to be able to be in a negotiation that can be intense, to redline things back and forth with a lawyer and an HR person who, in many other circumstances, probably have leverage over the fact whether you get this job or not. And to be able to be calm and understand, but also be empathetic to what their arguments are, and to allow you to communicate in an even-keeled way that let them know what your perspective is and turn them into advocates for you. Right. And that's something that's carried through over the years. I've had multiple kind of, HR people I was negotiating with. They're like, man, that was a really, like, you're a hard negotiator. Like, but there was no ill will. I know, sorry. Because everything was done so professionally, even keel. It wasn't angry in any way. Yeah. And then the last kind of part's interviewing. We think of interviewing as like them evaluating us to say yes or no. Interviewing is also about your opportunity to learn about their ladders, their pay bands, their non-salary compensation, and to lay the groundwork for how you want to negotiate your salary with them, right? That and to learn about your competition. I didn't know about this. You can ask them about the other candidates. Ask them about other candidates. Ask them about the ranges that other candidates ask for. Ask them what skills they have that you don't. I had another Ted. I had some Ted Lasso in here, but practice, right? And not just the interviews, but practice negotiating, right? If you don't have someone you can practice with, find someone. And with that, I got all the way through the end without mentioning AI. The whole landscape's changing, right? Agile, adaptive. We're all, cloud and security as code, but layoffs are changing the landscape, and so is AI, right? And so all of this is going to change. We have to adapt with it. Last thing, I want to drop a plug. I would love to do an AppSec Pay Talk where it's more trusted in person, where you actually bring your information, your current information, and talk through the challenges that you're facing, what your goals are. And we have some facilitators, experienced facilitators in Boyd, another person he works with for the Pay Talks for DevOps days. And I'd love to do this. So if you're interested and you want to get help, you want to get mentoring, ping me. You can easily find me on LinkedIn or the OS Slacks. All right. That's the end.
Thank you, Bankim. Into that. I would say if we have questions, we're also kind of out of time right now. So I guess you'll stick around potentially if there's folks in the room want to talk. And otherwise, thank you all for attending the May OWASP Boston chapter. And we'll see you next month.